Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I don't know where you are in the world. I'm Stephen Sonsino. I've been running this summit on Now Write Your Book, the Now Write Your Book Summit for the last day and a half. Feels like 5 minutes. But I want to say thank you to all my interviewees for sparing the time to be interviewed. I've collected these together over some time, and it's been instructive to see the enthusiasm that everybody has for writing, and the different ways that everybody approaches the topic. Recently, we watched Peter Larange and his experience of writing to think and writing about the different industries that he's been involved with, shipping industry, now in education. And I'm reminded of LYNDA GRATTON writing to think and her work in the human resources industry. But also we've been looking at how entrepreneurs think and write. So we've looked at Rob Moore and Steve Berry. So there are a lot of other interviews. If you haven't seen them, if you haven't been on those live streams, if you want to check them out, some of them are already posted on YouTube and some of them will be posted later today. So if you're watching the replays, there should be all 14 of these interviews on the summit, and they all have different aspects. I suppose if there's a theme to the summit as a whole, it's partly why write a book. What are the practical, logical reasons that you might write a book? But also to some extent how. I'm not going to get into the how-tos exactly because publishing changes, technology changes. But there are some general how-tos that we'll touch on, particularly in the interviews for day 2. This is really about how to write, how to engage, how to work with your readers, how to understand your readers. But in the next interview, in the summit interview, I want to show you in a moment, I'm going to show you an interview I did with ALOK SINHA very recently. ALOK SINHA, the former MD, Managing Director, CEO of Capita Services in India, very popular manager, very popular leader, a guy who was writing a book at the time I came to meet him sometime last year, and he asked me to take a look. I think wanted me to craft a blurb for the book, and that's something we should probably talk about as a marketing strategy. I took a look at the manuscript and made a few suggestions, but I'll leave that till we get into it. ALOK was very kind to suggest that the feedback helped, which is cool. There is an outside chance that he's here live on the discussion, and if he is, I'm expecting him to pipe up at the end. But we'll see, and we'll see if he reveals himself. Tell us if you're here, ALOK. I'd love to catch up later on. This is, I think, a very profound interview because ALOK is a very deep thinker. And he articulates his thoughts very much, and he wants to share those thoughts. So he is able to articulate his thoughts very, very, very clearly. So I urge you to pay careful attention, take lots of notes. He has a lot to say. And his recent book, Achieving Successful Business Outcomes, is out now, published by Routledge. And it's a very detailed approach to handling strategy in times of chaos and difficulty. So it's very relevant to the situation that we find ourselves in now anyway. So read it as a book to enjoy, but also pay careful attention to what ALOK SINHA has to say. Let me introduce you to ALOK SINHA. ALOK SINHA, I mean, what can I say to introduce you? You have launched countless businesses, 2-3 years, build, innovate. Most recently, and this is when we first met, you were at Capita in India as Managing Director, Chief Executive. I'm not quite sure of the terminology, but you certainly had massive and overall responsibility for that amazing business. And I heard that you were writing a book. And so I was absolutely delighted to offer you a couple of tips and hints, and you were kind enough to adopt one or two of those. But I have to ask you, you are one of the most busy, in-demand corporate executives that I know. And yet you take the time to write a book. I can't believe this. Why write a book, ALOK?
So there were two very distinct reasons. By the way, the actual writing began about 8 years ago. It finished when I was in Capita, and that's the time when I started searching for a publisher, and I found one, luckily, very quickly. So I think one of the first one was establishing credibility. And when you want to reach a far wider audience, there's no other way to connect than a book. And so that was my first piece, right?
Let me just jump in right away. I'm sorry, I won't do this all the time, I promise, but let me just get this right. You're saying that to be chief executive of an amazing global institution, and yet you still feel the need to establish credibility? Is that because it's credibility in a different way for a different purpose, or what exactly? I want to nail this down if I can.
All right. So I think most of the battle is in your own mind. So, yeah, so I think it was for a far wider audience, far wider audience, not credibility in a sense that I was not well known, I was not well respected. No, not at all. Reaching a far wider audience. So it's a 100x, 1000x, millionx, whatever that number is, to reach that audience. And I did think about it. Do I have anything where I can share with people which can catapult my, at least, if you don't want to use the credibility, at least people knowing me, my name far and wide. And I think I did have. I spoke about DIMT, and I did have. One, I've had the good fortune of interacting with leaders from nearly 50 countries. Nearly 50 countries. Okay. And that's a big list. I have helped them grow. I've helped them deliver. And remember, I was both on the vendor side as well as on the organization side. I have spent time between those two, right? Nearly 30, 35 years. But there was something more. And this was extremely fortunate to have people like Mr. Ratan Tata as my skip level, Mr. Ambani as my skip level, Chris Sinclair, who was the CEO and chairman of Pepsi, as my skip level. In fact, he was the CEO and chairman of Cambridge Solutions, which I went on to then run. I got the same position as what he got. Romesh Wadhwani, I mean, I can talk a number of people. And this is like what they don't teach you at business schools. This was exactly something like that. I know why you're smiling, but it seemed. Yeah, and I'll give you examples. Like, in one of the meetings where we were presenting to Mr. Tata the yearly business plan, he had demolished us. No, that's a very poor word. He's one of the most civil. I've never seen him upset. But, he was reticent, just not accept. And then he went on to say that the only two things which I need is profitability and market share. And he went on to explain how those two helps him to run a conglomerate of 100 organizations. Or Mr. Ambani once told us how one single metric can help him manage even the most complex, large project that he's running. I mean, they're always building something or the other. Right. So I think that was the one. So they had simple rules to run their lives and business, and it is not that they would rummage through a million or whatever number of metrics. Very, very simple rules. And I was privy to some of them. I was only 29 when I became the executive officer to the executive director of Tata Motors, Saroj Gandhi. And, basically you fast track to that position because they want you to mimic a CEO's position and then grow into one very quickly. And that's how Tatas do that. They fast track you by 10, 15 years. So that was one. From a very, very young age, I saw boardroom very, very closely. I saw large organizations. And remember, Tata Motors was the biggest organization. We touched 10,000 crores Indian rupees, which is roughly about $3.3 billion. We were the biggest organization to reach that number. And I was right in the middle, of course, with my executive director running it, but I was his EO, right running that. Right? So that was one, lot of learnings. Two other things which I found common amongst all of these super guys were, they were all focused on outcomes. They never focused on anything in between, you know. I spoke about Mr. Tata. Jack Welch used to say either number one or number two, right? He never said what top line, what bottom line. Outcome. You are either number one or number two, or we sell you out, right? Now, all of these were outcome-based people, all of them, nothing else. And third, they had a beautiful sense to distinguish between the sound of natural and the sound of unnatural. Whether it was negotiation with people, meetings, numbers, enormous capability to distinguish between natural and unnatural. And you know,
sorry to interrupt. You're meaning more whether someone's being authentic or sincere, that sort of thing.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, if they're talking authentic and sincere, if they are looking at numbers, whether they are cooked, whether they are right, whether we're wrong, and they would zero down very quickly into the real root of the problem, very, very rapidly. And I think that is what kick-started me into doing this. Now, you know, I have a very good or bad habit. Sorry. I keep a diary, a notebook, and all leadership lessons. And remember, when you're a 29-year-old young man and you're sitting in a meeting which Mr. Tata is chairing, you're in awe. And that's what I was. And it was not only with him, with every other leader. I would keep noting down those leadership lessons that were very critical. Some amazing leadership lessons in simplicity, amazing lessons. So, but you know, that also was a negative for me because I tried to pack all of that into the book in the first shot. And the book became like a huge monolith, and someone said, so I had to go back, reduce it. So basically, these were the reasons why, and I went in search of encapsulation of all of this, you know, focus on the outcomes. And I accidentally encountered Herbert Spencer. You know, he's a 19th century metaphysicist. And he was one of the first ones to write that time, space, and force drives outcome. Then I started researching Einstein, Henry Lefebvre, even Aristotle. They used this freely. Okay. The only change which I did was I replaced force by action, because action abstracts force. And that is why my model is time, space, and action. And it's a very tested action. It's a very tested model. So it will seem strange, but you know, it is true that business strategies are affected by just three fundamental variables: time, space, and action. And the whole book is about those. Yeah. Just those. And if you allow me to talk just a little bit more, so I went ahead and broke time, space, and action into smaller chunks. So, you know, time it's cyclical, moves from recession to stable to growth. Space, I spoke about unknown, and action I spoke about. There was only three: create, sustain, and destroy. So if you look at this 3 into 3 into 3, there are only 27 states possible. And every business will be in one of these 27 states. So I don't know whether you're aware of this Chinese I Ching. I don't know. So I Ching has 64 states of nature. Okay. So it's basically Chinese I Ching arrived at 64 states of nature. And this was based on the forces of yin and yang. And I've not done enough research on that, but I know this is how it's done. And if each of the life situation maps on to one of those 64 states. So depending upon your life goal, you can use the I Ching to guide you to your next course of action. And my book is somewhat similar. It speaks about the 3 forces of action, the 27 strategic states, and then you can plot alternatives for moving to your end state. And each alternative has different risk. And I call it elastic strategies or risk elasticity of strategy. And that's how the book was done.
Yeah. What is astonishing to me is, I mean, you know, I can't stop you teaching. I mean, you have so much desire to share the knowledge, and to some extent, that is also, I guess, one of the reasons why you wrote the book. One of the reasons why you wrote the book is you wanted to share what you've discovered from your notes in the meetings with Mr. Tata, Mr. Ambani, with Chris Sinclair. And so maybe one of the reasons for writing the book, at least putting it all down, is also helping you to think this through, to research it, to put a framework on it. So I think that in my mind, what I'm taking out of this piece of the conversation is that one of the reasons I believe you wrote the book is not necessarily to establish credibility, because you have that business credibility if you've had meetings with those people, but maybe it's to switch credibilities. And so I'm thinking aloud here. Maybe writing a book helps you to articulate the framework, how you see the world, so that you're establishing credibility, yes, but it's as a thought leader as opposed to an entrepreneur or as a business executive. So I can see what you're saying, establish credibility, but not as a business person. You've got that in spades.
As a thought, absolutely, you got it right. As a thought leader, absolutely.
So that I think is a very powerful lesson, and one we haven't come across before in the podcast. We hear people talking about, I write because I'm a thought leader, but you wrote to switch credibilities, or to make that even more obvious. But anybody who meets you for more than 5 minutes knows, because you trot out one or other model and framework, you just can't stop. You're an unstoppable sharer of knowledge. I love also the focus on outcomes and how you elaborate that, because that has become the title of the book, hasn't it? Achieving Successful Business Outcomes. Now, we'll talk a bit more about the title in a minute, because I think I may have messed you up there. We'll talk about that in a minute. But how did you actually write the book? Because if you started a while back, then it was, you write to think and so on. But when did it crystallize? When did you think, okay, it's a book? And then how did you write it? Because you had a day job at the same time as well.
That's right. So I think a lot of what I've written is also a lot of what I've practiced. And, when you're running your strategy sessions as a chairman, as a CEO, and when you're presenting to the board, and one of the boards I had in London was pretty tough. You start to develop a framework which can be repeated. And I'll tell you, you see, any framework is about pattern, right? There are repetitive patterns, and the idea is, can you see the pattern? When a black swan event occurs, the pattern breaks, right? So how do you become an expert? You become an expert if you can recognize the pattern and this is what is more likely to occur. And a part of this was, how do I identify patterns? The second part is, when the pattern breaks, what do you do? Right? And that is what I started mulling, and that's when I start. So I had a lot of this contextual pieces of information or tools that I had developed, and they were not formal tools, by the way, but very contextual tools developed for a particular company at that point in time. So one company was negative for 5 years, And we switched it to positive within less than 6 months, and we went on to grow 5x in 5 years, right? Which was very different from something else where the company was very, very large and we had nothing. The requirements were different. So that's how, these were. So in my mind, I think I had 60% of the content as fixed, but the 40% was varied. I wasn't sure. And I was urged by
sorry to interrupt. So this is sort of in your mind, or you actually had written down articles or frameworks and you then had to collate it, or
no, it was all in my mind, or it was very loosely in whatever I had presented to my boards, to my people, running 3-day offsites or whatever it was. It was all there, but it wasn't combined as a book. And then I was urged by a lot of people, my own wife, some of my colleagues. They were egging, why don't you write? And I must be honest. The first pass was horrible. So
why?
Because, as I said, I just packed everything. I took a lot of time and just packed everything. And so people say, right, they don't find time, it's so busy. No, not at all. I think everyone will find time. So what I used to do was, I would get up in the morning, the first thing, 2 hours every day. And my view was, I will write. So there are parts in my book which are pretty dense. There are parts in my book which are pretty easy, but simple. I would write what an average reader would be able to absorb without any loss of concentration for maybe 10 to 15 minutes. So sometimes it would end up in writing just 2 pages, and sometimes it could be 5 pages. Because, life's like that. You are distracted by things happening around you. And my view was, I will just do that. Right? So that's how I started building. And then I realized that I had actually written a lot. And that's the time when you need to be severe with yourself and say, okay, this is not needed. And I deleted chapters after chapter, then rewrote a lot of it.
Yeah.
But, I did one other piece. When you are publishing a book, it is a relationship that you are developing with your reader, right? And this is one-to-one. It's not a podcast. It's not being beamed. So it's one-to-one. You are developing, right? Now, for a reader, why should he read a book? There must be a prize somewhere, right, at the end. And every book must have a prize at the end, right? But I decided I'll make it slightly different. I decided that every chapter will have a prize at the end. So the way I conceptualized it was that every chapter should have enough content to stand on its own. Every chapter should help you in achieving the final objective, but you don't need to go to the last page because the organization may not be. So for example, time as what is time as an entity? Time is opportunity. What is space as an entity? Space is strength. And so on and so forth, okay? And what is action? Action is how do you extract opportunity from time, and create value. So it's a life cycle, right? So each of these were standalone, and I have tried to identify what happens when time and action meets together, action and space meets together, action time meets together, and all of three meets together. So I tried to do that. So each chapter has a prize at the end, and I then realized that it can be used as a consulting book. It can be used as a book for management graduates, business school, as a reading material, because it's so vastly connected with a lot of things. So that's what I had done. But if I were to give any advice to my future readers, first time, just leaf through it. Try and make sense out of it second time. I hope it is a handbook which will be kept on your desk.
Yeah.
And can be referred to whenever you run into some kind of niche.
Yeah.
So that's how it was.
Let me. You make a really, really powerful observation there about the idea of the book. There is a prize at the end. There is an outcome. There's almost a transformation. I try and describe it as a transformation. You want the reader to be transformed in some way, or to be capable of making a transformation. But I love the instinct to have a prize every chapter. That's fantastic. So when you'd written this final manuscript, what happened to it then? Did you share it with friends or colleagues, or did you go straight to the publisher? What happened when you had compiled the manuscript, ALOK?
Well, I did go to friends. I went to college. I even went to my dad, who's a very prolific writer. He has books. He has about 200 research papers in forensic sciences.
Wow.
That's realistic. I went. And the first one was, generally people, so it was like a yo-yo stick. One chapter was fantastic. The second one was, why is it written? Another one was fantastic. The third one was, why it is written. And that's exactly how they described. The first one was, wow. And the second one was, why? So it went through some very troubled times for me, some very severe editing for me. But I think I'm very happy with where I am today, extremely happy. It went through 3 revisions. And then once it was done, so that was a process of about another 18 months. That was a very, very rigorous process. It was a process of 18 months. And I think that can be solved. I think I was naive that I didn't take any professional help. That could have been solved. But I think between the amount of time I had and amount of time I was spending in my office, I think this was the best I could do. And I just extended it. I could have really squeezed it. So look at this. So if you write 2 pages a day, every day, in 100 days, that's 200 pages. So no one, and anyone can write 2 pages a day. So if no one should crib that they can't write a book. They can write a book. It's only how well it is conceived in the head, how well it is designed. And as I said, I think I only contextualized 60%, 40 I not. And that is the reason why these iterations. Maybe that's the lesson. You should get the full thing laid out before you go inside.
Absolutely. I mean,
then I reached out for sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say this is if there's one piece of advice that I think is an absolute gem in what you say, it is this moment of course we can write, but if you're writing with no purpose or no sense of direction, you're just writing to get things out, well then that's okay as a mechanism, but you must add a premium on of time so that at the end you can reform and refocus it. You then have the raw materials, if you like, the stone that you can then chip out of. But if you know there is a book in you and you articulate, who is it for, who is the reader, what's the prize at the end, then you can write it in a much more streamlined way. And this is why Jackie and I have given people this software app, because there is a way, there is a mechanism for doing that, and it is doing all the planning, as you say, in advance. But listen, tell me a little bit about the relationship with the publisher. I think when I discovered you were going to go with the publisher, and it's a wonderful publisher, I think Taylor Francis and the whole family of books there that they have, the imprints are wonderful. But I wasn't so sure that was the right approach for you. But why did you want to go with a mainstream publisher, ALOK? Can I shift the conversation to that?
I'll be extremely honest. So I thought I'll put it on number 5 in my list, but I'll be extremely honest. I'll put it number 1 because you asked me this question. There is a general feeling that if your first book is not with a regular publisher and you are self-publishing, then this is a huge non-acceptance by the erudite world. The intellectual world has rejected you. I think, and it's extremely wrong, I've realized today, because so that's one. The second was, I didn't want to publish with an Indian publisher, and I have nothing against them. But, and so I did send to a couple of Indian publishers. I did get an acceptance. I got 2 acceptances from outside of India, but Taylor and Francis were the fastest. And I was desperate to go out and publish it. They were the fastest. I got one more, which is a pretty well-renowned British publisher. But since Taylor and Francis came to me in less than a week's time, I thought I was obligated, and I said, yeah, I'm going through it. I didn't want to. So I wanted a global publisher. I wanted a worldwide reach. And there is a reason. I think a global publisher is important because, first of all, very rigorous copy editing. I know of friends who have released books in India where the copy editing is pretty poor. And so then they need to depend on other means to propagate their book. I thought that the copy editing was very rigorous.
Yeah. Yeah.
They kept giving me constant improvement suggestions. Wherever, it seemed that I was obtruse or abstruse, and wherever it seemed that I was not able to communicate something, or I was, reiterating, they gave me a lot of suggestions. They would never change it, but they would give me suggestions. Do you think this is what you mean? And that was great. So I had my copy editor sitting out of the UK, and she was giving me a lot of improvement suggestions.
Yeah, that's also useful.
The third one was, when you deal with a global publisher, and remember, it wasn't that I knew about Authors Channel before. And if I were to redo this whole thing again, it would definitely be different for much different reason. So when you deal with a global publisher, you're dealing with a very highly experienced editor who is concurrently dealing with a number of accomplished writers. Right? So you know whether your content is current or not. Now, the kind of books which are published in India. There are some which are exceptionally good books. But then there are only that few publishers who publish that. Right? And that's far, and if you can get to their parents, why not? And that's what I chose. But broadly, this is why I chose. But the truth was, that point in time, taking the self-publishing option, and there, by the way, self-publishers in India seem to be very rudimentary. Yeah. There was too much of risk, and I had done a lot of effort, a lot of work, and I didn't want to risk that.
Yeah. So listen, I could talk to you all day about what you've done and how you've done it. I think, for example, how you made the proposal to a publisher, and presumably you didn't really have a connection, so it was out of the blue. This is one of the things that many people are concerned about. How do I find a publisher for my book? Let's do that another time. Let's look at that another time, because there's a lot of valuable experience that you have there. To get 2 acceptances, from mainstream global publishers, that's outstanding. But what now? Because I know you have another book potentially on the stocks, and I have to apologize for stealing the title. I mean, it's for urging you to nudge the title forwards. But how is that going? What's the status on book number 2, and why are you going to do another book?
Yeah. So vision is not enough. That is the title, of course.
It's a great
and
title.
You see, when you have all the answers, it's not necessarily you get the final outcome, right? So it is all about the art of observation, the art of crystallization, and the art of implementation. Even when you have all the answers, you will need to observe, crystallize, decant, and then implement, because everyone has a different requirement, a different environment, a different need. And so this is like an extension to my current book. So there are methods, there are ways to achieve the outcome, but how do you ensure it? What are the failure points? How do you learn from people? How do you keep yourself open to learning? How do you keep yourself like a sponge? And those are some of the and that's a lot more story driven than what I've done over here. And those that is the second part of the book.
Yeah,
I think it's a very natural extension.
yes,
And yes, we will figure out a way. I think you and I, we've already spoken about it, and let's look at how Authors Channel can help me to do the second one. Now that I have proven to my own self that I can write a book which can be published by a great publisher.
yeah. I think there's the two things that you have done, to my way of thinking, is that in articulating A Vision Is Not Enough, which is an outstanding title, by the way, because it's so attractive, and it implies there's a prize. Some people may be feeling, I'm successful, I have a strategic vision or a personal vision or a leadership vision, but you're saying, but there's something more. So there's an implicit prize in the title. So I absolutely love that. It seems to me that how you describe this book is it's much more about the process of how to achieve business outcomes than the content. Achieving business outcomes is about, here's the framework, this is what you do. And it seems to me Vision Is Not Enough is very much about the how. And also I love your choice of stories. I mean, if there's something that I've learned over the past 30 years, it's that, no matter how good your framework, you can tell it in a very dull way. But almost any story will be so attractive. And I'm looking forward to nudging that out of you when the time is right. But listen, thank you so much for your insights today. Firstly, your recognition that we write in part to establish a new credibility, to position ourselves as thought leaders on a par with other men and women around the world who've written books. I would debate with you whether you need to publish with a mainstream publisher for that. I think that is, and you said it brilliantly, that is a battle in my own mind, you said. And I think you're absolutely right, because I would actually debate with you. I think that people think this, that it's important. But when it comes to it, if I had to ask you, who was the publisher of Jim Collins' Good to Great book, most people won't know who that is. I think it's a myth that we have in our own minds. But let's not go there. You also talked about simple rules. And I think the great thing that you've done in the book is there is a prize at the end, a very strong prize. There's a prize in every chapter. So I love that concept. And for me, the simple rules are about outcome and so on that you put in there, focused on outcomes. But I love the belief that there's more to do and that everybody can do it. And I'm particularly grateful to you for articulating that if people can have a framework or a plan to start, then they can do this much more quickly. So I look forward to seeing Vision Is Not Enough come out. I look forward to hearing your articulations of the differences in the process, because I think that will be extremely valuable for others. How can people contact you if they want to ask you questions or pick up on any of the themes that you've shared? How can people contact you, ALOK?
So they can send me a mail on, and I can send mail IDs. I have. They can reach me on my website, which is aloksinha.com, www.aloksinha.com.
Perfect.
Or this one is a little difficult to spell, but it's ALOK at. This is the startup that we have, which is a blockchain startup. Istaka Paza, ISTAKAPAZA. So
.com.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time today. We could have gone on so long, and I just think to make sure that people get to their next meeting or lunch or dinner or breakfast or whatever time of day it is. Thank you so much and look forward to speaking to you again very, very soon. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Fantastic with you today.
Great, great insights, great insights. ALOK, you're here as well in the chat as well, I know that. So if anybody has some questions, please post them now. We can get ALOK to maybe answer them in the short time that we have left. I thought, though, I would just remind you, if you don't already know, if you were serious about going to a mainstream publisher, then the best way forward is to get hold of this. I think you can get it on Kindle, the Writers and Artists Yearbook. It's updated every year, and it's pretty chunky, as you can see. Writers and Artists Yearbook. So you can go through this, look at the different sections, and find a publisher that's of interest to you, that has something. Another way is to literally look along your bookshelf and see what other books you have, and find a publisher that sits in the same area, or rather the area that you want to serve if you're making a pivot, if you're changing direction. So that would be the solution that I would suggest if you're interested in the mainstream. And then look inside, see if you can find a name or the name of the publisher, or go online to their firm and find the name of a director or someone that you can write to, and then put your very succinct pitch into them 1, 2, or 3 pages that will summarize your book, who the audience is. I think I'll do a separate live stream about that, because I think that's quite a skill to be able to do that. And maybe, ALOK, we can get your insights and have you back to talk about how you pitch to Taylor and Francis. That would be good. Let me just check in the comments. What are we doing here? Okay, all right, Shreyas, nice to have you. Thank you very much. Definitely, he's a bloke who says what he thinks, but is very articulate about it as well. ALOK, I hope you're not listening. Don't listen. So a couple of observations from me just before we close. I think the subtext, the meta message in ALOK in your interview is that the battle is in your own mind when you're thinking about credibility. I need more credibility. I need a mainstream publisher. Nobody really does. But you need to get the message out there in a good-looking book, and you can do that other ways. So take a basic model and apply it to your area. I think that's another lesson, and I think, Hugh, you had it right when you were saying that pretty much all scenarios could be cut down to the same to just 3 factors in this case. For me, the message I take, and why I've titled this Use a Book to Pivot to Serve a Different Community, is this idea that having a book helps you to switch credibilities. So you're known for whatever it is you're known for in your past history, but now you're looking to serve a different community, or maybe to serve the same community in a different way as an advisor, a consultant, or whatever. So writing a book establishes or switches credibility. So I think that's a profound lesson I got from you, ALOK. And you also mentioned, and we didn't really concentrate on this, but you said a book is a relationship with the reader. And I just want to close with that thought for a minute. We don't have time to go into rigorous editing, but this idea that a book is a relationship, a one-to-one relationship, is so important. Why do books have the impact they do? It isn't about the spread. If you have 100 million people have your book on their shelves, but they haven't read it, you haven't touched anybody. The people that you impact are the people that pick up the book, open it, and read it. And there you have a one-to-one relationship with them. And your words are in their head. You know, if you have an audiobook as well, your words can be in their ears as well. Your voice and all of those other things. So a book is a one-to-one relationship, so you can make profound change in people if they read your book. So everything we've really been talking about is getting to that point, getting your message entering the head of the readers, the audience, the community that you serve. So that's why we have to spend so much effort on the writing, the quality of the writing, the look and feel of the book, making it easy for them to reach. So all of these things now beginning to come together, because it's this point where your message hits the mind of the reader, the mind of the community you serve. Your message has to be persuasive, has to be articulated well. It has to look and feel good. There's got to be some solidity, some concrete material there, but it also has to be delivered in a way that is very, very persuasive. So another time I'll tell you about Jay Conger, the professor who wrote the foreword to our Leadership Unplugged. He wrote an article and then subsequently a book called The Necessary Art of Persuasion. So when you get deep into writing your book, you need to write persuasively. That's outside the bounds of this summit, but that's something I can help you with offline. Any more comments here? No, that's about it. I want to thank you so much, ALOK, for your time. Thank you for joining us today. I've had a blast ribbing you during this session. I enjoyed the interview and the other interview we did that's also on LinkedIn. That was fantastic. I want to say thank you so much, everybody. Good, Hugh, yeah. In the mind, the magic happens in the mind of the reader. So everything we've been talking about on this summit over the last 2 days is really just taking us up to that point. So thank you for acknowledging that. Let's wrap it up here. ALOK, thank you for joining us. I think so far you're the only author who's been able to join us while we do the live streams. Everybody else is busy doing webinars elsewhere. LYNDA GRATTON is all over the place doing 1,001 things. Peter Larange is probably in a cafe in Zurich. No, he isn't. Thank you so much, everybody. What we'll be doing after the break, we'll have a short break now, 15 minutes, and back at 12. So the 12 o'clock British summertime, if you're still up, Hugh, I think you'd get a lot out of this. Got Daniel Priestley coming up in the next interview. Daniel Priestley is the founder of Dent Global. I don't know if you remember this comment from Steve Jobs. We're here to put a dent in the universe. He's a guy who's built a number of amazing books, and this Dent Global is a training company, a global training company for entrepreneurs. It's another one of those bullet point after bullet point after bullet point. It's great that these are being recorded because you're going to get so much out of that. So ALOK, thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you guys again in 15 minutes. We're going to have Daniel Priestley, founder of Dent Global. I look forward to seeing you then. Matrix.